Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Star Wars Library. So, today, get excited because we're talking about a novel again. And this is a novel that I guess I have an interesting history with just because I feel like I kind of slept on this one for a while. And I got into this one really late, like a lot later than I probably should have, being the EU fan that I am. And that is the first novel of the X Wing series called Rogue Squadron. Is like I said, this is the first book of the series written by Michael Stackpole. And in my history, I guess you could say, is a little bit interesting with it. You see, um, I'd always known about it for pretty much since I was first getting into the expanded universe way back in the day. And because I would open, whenever I get a new EU book, right, I would see the X-wing books in the timeline that they would used to, that they used to put in the novels of, Star Wars books. In fact, this edition that I have here, I believe, has that timeline in it. Yes, this timeline here. I'd always look through that just to see where my new book fit in the timeline. And plus, it was always cool to kind of re-review things and just kind of, I liked seeing continuity, even, as far back as, when I was in grade school. And I always saw these books in there, the X-Wing series. And I always kind of slept on them. I always passed on them. I always passed up the chance to get them or to read them. And it's interesting because I loved the Rogue Squadron video games. I loved X Wings and Y Wings and all that stuff. I always thought those ships were cool. I loved the games, the video games where I got to play in those ships, such as like the Rebel Assault games, for example. But this was one that I always just kind of was like, meh. And I think the main reason for it was because I always thought, well, they just featured these random, you know, characters in the book. It's not featuring the big three. I want to read about Luke, Han, and Leia, you know, or since the prequels are coming out, I want to read about Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Padme. I want to read about the two trios, right? And so if I was going to read anything in the New Republic era, I wanted it to be about the Skywalkers and the Solos. And so I just kept passing on it for years and years. I knew they existed. I didn't think bad of them. I just was like, meh, I'll get to them eventually. I'll read them eventually. I'll add them to my collection eventually. Well, when Disney bought Star Wars, it was kind of a, maybe I should start, getting more things. And that's when I started to accumulate some more than I had been. And then when Disney and Lucasfilm rebooted the timeline, that was when I was like, okay, I should probably jump in and read some of this stuff now. And this was one of the ones I jumped into. And I was really, really, really surprised about this book. I really didn't think I was going to like it that much, and it turned out to be one of my favorite books. This one in particular, one of my favorite books, but one of my favorite series in the expanded universe. Michael Stackpole did a phenomenal job with this series, and with the ones that he did, and then obviously this one in particular. So basically, I mean, this book is basically about the formation of the new Rogue Squadron. Wedge Antilles is putting together a new group of rogues, and he's recruiting them. And it's kind of, detailing some of their earlier missions and, where they stand in the New Republic and how they're going to, put the Imperial Remnant in its place. It's obviously, like I said, led by Wedge Antilles, who I knew from the movies because I had seen the six probably one too many times. And I knew who he was. But I think after reading this, I think that this series is what made Wedge Antilles the more popular character. I was always like, oh, cool, Wedge. I guess I never thought negative or positive. He was just like, oh, he's sort of there. After this, I thought very positive Wedge. Now I get very excited whenever Wedge would show up in a, in a video game, visiting it now or seeing him in a novel now. Back then, it was like, if he appeared in a novel, it's like, oh, yeah, Wedge. Or in the Jedi Academy video game, oh, yeah, Wedge. There he is. I know him. Now it's like, oh, like Wedge. And I would probably want to meet Dennis Lawson if I could get his autograph. But again, it's not really because of the movies, it's because of these books. So here's the thing, too. With this story, Stackpole does a really good job. A lot of these characters are new, primarily Corn Horn, who Stackpole created. Um, there's a lot of good backstories given to all these different characters, and they have their own unique personalities, and it makes us as the reader care about them a lot more than we should. Again, like I said, one of my fears coming in here is like, am I going to care about all these different, random rogue squadron pilots? And the answer is yes, I do. Stackpole and then later on Alston made me care about these characters. And I was like, wow, I care about what happens to them. I hope they make it out okay. I just remember constantly thinking that. The other thing too is that Stackpole writes really good action. I thought he's usually been pretty good at this, in any of his other books. And I love how he describes all the dogfights and the military tactics and flying. And here's the thing, he made me kind of realize, oh, like a space battle, it's kind of dangerous, and there's a lot more that goes to it instead of just, hey, jump in your starfighter and blast some TIE fighters. Like, it's kind of a big ordeal, and it's a huge risk to do. And it made me think different, especially when going back and watching any of the movies. It's like, oh shoot, like that's a risky thing to do, folks. And then of course the world building. He expands the universe, pardon the pun. He's giving more insight into how the New Republic is currently at this point, and where how the Remnant is staying, and the challenges in a post-Endor world. It's really interesting, and I really, really like it. It feels very balanced. There isn't many things where I'm like, oh, this is, so, like, where the heck did that come from kind of thing. Like, the action's good, the dialogue's good. I mean, it really kept me engaged. Again, very, very happily surprised here. Now, been singing its praises here, but there are a couple of negatives, for me at least, that I have with the book. There were a couple moments in it where I'm like, I could have seen that coming. Like, I kind of saw that coming. Like, there are a couple points where I'm like, oh, that was predictable. Again, that's not a bad thing, but it kind of fell a little bit a couple times in tropes for me, where I'm like, I've seen it before. The other thing, too, is, and this is just a personal thing, I think Corran Horn took a little bit too much of the spotlight. I know he is a bigger character in the, expanded universe, and obviously is someone who read a lot of stuff, like New Jedi Order, Legacy of the Force, Fate of the Jedi, and other things where he was more on the Jedi Council. I knew more about him. So in here, it was kind of a, oh, like, can I get to know him as well as all these other pilots? And you do get to know these other pilots, but I don't know. I feel like Corran, even more so than Wedge, I think Corran takes a little bit more of the spotlight. So I'm like, I'd prefer more of a balanced approach, but it's not a deal breaker for me. It's just something that I noticed, and I think it's one of my least favorite aspects of it. But X-Wing Rogue Squadron, is this an essential read? I would say yeah, because it's going to set up Rogue Squadron, post, Return of the Jedi. Obviously, you hear it in Empire Strikes Back. Luke, in the lore, Luke and Wedge set up Rogue Squadron, shortly after the Battle of Yavin. Luke leaves the group after the Battle of Hoth and Empire, and then he kind of focuses on Jedi, and then he'll fly with them occasionally, but Wedge takes over. So it's kind of setting Wedge Antilles up and his thing, and then obviously getting to know these pilots. These novels will kind of jump here and there within the greater expanded universe where they take place, and then you'll see these characters come in, and you'll get more excited, and I think you'll get more reward when you see them crop up and other things later. So and plus it introduces Corran Horn, who, like I said, will become a big player later on down the line in more of the later expanded universe. So I do think that this book is in fact worth your time. I do think it's a good read, and if you're like me, who's kind of like, there's not a lot of main movie characters in here, don't let that disenfranchise you. It is a very good read. Michael Stackpole did a great job. Highly, highly recommend it. So, folks, that is all the time I have for today, and I will see you next time with another episode of the Star Wars Library.